Hi everyone, welcome back to our series on vampires, the science behind the myths, and we're going to continue talking about porphyria, cutanea, tarda today. So this is another step on the porphyria pathway, synthesizing heme. Last time, you may know we talked about AIP, which talked about specifically Alice and all that kind of stuff. We'll review that part of the pathway as well, but we're adding on more enzymes today, and this porphyria is very different than acute intermittent porphyria, and this one's really interesting for the vampire myth, so please stick around for this video. But something interesting about porphyria, cutanea, tarda. So you can see that it is cutaneous. We'll get into that in a little bit. But this type of porphyria is 80% acquired. So most people who have this type of porphyria do not have a genetic mutation. Most of them acquire this disease from something else. So most of the time, thinking about the vampire myths and back in history, before we had a lot of modern medicine, we had probably a lot of hepatitis C, had a lot of alcohol consumption, probably a lot of HIV as well, even though they didn't know at the time what HIV was or what hep C was. But these enzymes that we use to produce heme are produced in the liver. So think about this. You could have a porphyria that has a genetic mutation that takes away a certain enzyme. It has a deficiency in an enzyme due to a mutation. But in this case, if we are producing enzymes that are necessary for the pathway in the liver, if we damage the liver, we could inhibit those enzymes from being synthesized at all. So something like hepatitis C, which involves the liver, alcohol, which can cause cirrhosis or fatty liver disease, that can also inhibit synthesis of enzymes. HIV can also do that, even though that's a more systemic type disease. But the point here is that you don't have to be born with a mutation to get porphyria. So this might lead to people thinking that they can be infected with vampirism from somebody else, because if you have hep C going around, and hep C is contagious, you could be spreading porphyria theoretically to other people. And people with alcoholism, you could have acquired porphyria, cutanea, tarda. We're going to see that in this pathway. So let's look at the enzymes involved here. So I'm not going to go through the entire beginning of the pathway, because this is what we saw last time. We saw Alice activity converting glycine and succinyl-CoA to ALA, ALA being converted to PBG, and then PBG being converted to hydroxymethylbilane. And that's where we left off last time. But we're going to add a couple more steps to this pathway. So hydroxymethylbilane is going to be converted by uroporphyrinogen 3 co-synthase to uroporphyrinogen 3. And then that's not a super important compound, because then uroporphyrinogen 3 will be then converted to coproporphyrinogen 3 by an enzyme called URAD, or uroporphyrinogen 3 dehydratase. So URAD is going to be the key enzyme here today. So if we get rid of URAD, what is going to happen is, as you may know, if we inhibit an enzyme, we cannot go through the rest of the pathway. And of course, there are more steps down the pathway as well. Coproporphyrinogen 3 is going to end up being converted to other things, and then those are going to be converted to heme. But we're not going to add all of that yet. We're just going to focus on URAD today. So URAD is no longer working, so we cannot make coproporphyrinogen 3. And so as you know, if we cannot go forward, we have to go backwards. So we're going to have an increased level of uroporphyrinogen 3 and hydroxymethylbilane. And last time we saw Alice and induction. This time we're not going to worry about Alice. Alice doesn't play a huge part in this pathway. This actually is a very different mechanism than AIP did, because we're going to build up hydroxymethylbilane, and then there is a secondary pathway that's going to open up. So we are going to convert hydroxymethylbilane to uroporphyrinogen 1, and this does not require any enzymes. There's no enzyme that you make that would cause this to happen. This is spontaneous. And when I say it's spontaneous, that means when we get a high level of hydroxymethylbilane, it's going to spill over, and by the fact that it's just sitting there for a longer period of time, it's just going to degrade and become uroporphyrinogen 1. So, we normally would not enter this pathway, because if we can go forward converting to uroporphyrinogen 3 and to coproporphyrinogen 3, then we don't have enough spillage and we don't have enough hydroxymethylbilane left over to degrade to uroporphyrinogen 1. So we normally don't have this building up. But in this case, since we're missing urod, that is the only thing that is going to happen. And this is where we get symptoms, because uroporphyrinogen 1 and coproporphyrinogen are types of porphyrins. And porphyrins, when they build up, they are going to cause our symptoms of PCT. So these porphyrins are going to build up in tissues. They're just going to sit there. They're going to accumulate in different places in the body. And in this specific case, it's going to accumulate in the skin. And porphyrins don't respond well to sunlight. They have their own conversion process via sunlight. I'm not going to go into those details specifically. But what you need to know is that when you get porphyrins building up in the skin, you get extreme sunlight sensitivity. And something I did want to mention, I did put this at the top. So with AIP, acute intermittent porphyria, we saw primarily neuro and psychiatric symptoms. So we had people with hallucinations, we had seizures. We don't have any of that here because we're not building up ALA and PBG, we're building up porphyrins. So think of this as a totally different disease despite being in the same pathway. So we have our sunlight sensitivity, which is very characteristic of the vampire myths. Probably the main thing when people think of with vampires is inability to go out in sunlight. And this is what we see here. People who go out in the sun, they are going to have blisters. And they might have some hyper or hypopigmentation in sun-exposed areas. So you might see people who are very pale, which might also correlate with the vampire myths. So these people who are getting these blisters from being out in the sun, of course, they're not going to want to be out in the sun. They're going to go outside when it's dark. And so this can contribute to some of the social isolation and as well as just the stigma associated with these people who don't want to be out in the sunlight. And of course, rumors might spread that these people have some religious reason, some demonic vampire reason why they can't go out in the sunlight. People would speculate maybe they're not seeing this person except at nighttime, and they might wonder why, and that might lead them to have these wild conspiracy-like ideas, and you can see where these myths have spread because of that. So you get the sunlight sensitivity, that's the main presentation, but you can also get hypertrichosis, so significant increase in hair growth, especially on the face, on the arms, on the neck, and this, we'll talk about this in the vampire, werewolf myths as well, because that's kind of some overlap there. But you could also get alopecia, so not everyone would get increased hair growth, you might get people with decreased hair growth, and that's just two sides of the coin there. You can also get something called hemochromatosis, and this is an interesting aspect of all porphyrias, in that you need iron to make heme. It is an important compound that you need to make heme, and where you'd get an iron deficient anemia, so that's different, where you have an anemia because you can make the other components of heme. You're not going to have a buildup of these compounds with anemia, but if you're missing iron, you're going to have a lack of heme synthesis simply because you're missing the iron. But you're not going to build up the porphyrin. That's why you don't see this in something like anemia. But you flip this around, now you have enough iron. You have probably more than enough iron, but you don't have the other reactants necessary to make heme. So this iron buildup is going to cause hemochromatosis, and iron is an ion, and it's going to react something called the Fenton reaction, and that is going to produce free radicals, so electrons that float around, and that can cause a lot of oxidative damage, and that's a whole other video for another time. That's a lot of content. But if you understand hemochromatosis, this is a result potentially of PCT. You can also get very fragile skin. So if you've seen elderly people where their skin is very thin and it tears very easily, even under minor trauma, that's something that you can see here because you have the buildup of porphyrin in the skin. You have skin that's not, it's not a good defense for people. So you get skin tears very easily, you get trauma very easily, and with that, you can get significant scar tissue buildup. You can have some disfigurement of their face or of their hands or of other parts of their body, and that could also contribute to the myths, making people afraid. We don't like to say it, but people who don't meet certain social standards of beauty might be accused of having some sort of disorder, some sort of vampirism. A lot of the myths might correlate with something like that. We saw social isolation from people who had diseases like this. So this was kind of a longer video. A lot of content today talking about PCT. I hope that it was interesting. Next time, we're going to talk about porphyria is more found in children. So PCT is the most common porphyria in adults. So way more common than AIP and way more common than the porphyrias that we're going to see in children. But the next one, we are going to talk about pediatric porphyrias. And I hope you like this video, and I will see you all in the next one.